This
Excellent.
conference will now be recorded.
Forgot that it says that. So that's nice though, because now we know the conference is being recorded. um, anyway, thanks everyone for joining us today about kind of an exciting program that I definitely had heard about previously, but kind of got reconnected to at the Saving Places conference, and that is the Colorado Youth Corps. And I just thought of all of the different ways that our Main Street communities could benefit from this program. And then as I got to speaking with Scott Segerstrom, our main speaker of the day from the Colorado Youth Corps Association, he brought in even more ideas and as well as a little bit of potential money. So we have Madison Brannigan from GOCO on the line as well to talk about that little bit of potential money to help get some of your downtown goals accomplished through the Youth Corps. And with that, I think most of us know about just way too many virtual meeting spaces. To unmute yourself, you can generally just kind of hover over the bottom and click on that microphone. There's also the little speaking bubble for cartoon characters that will put you into chat to ask questions. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it on over to Scott. Scott, thank you, and you too, Madison, so much for joining us today and helping our Main Street communities understand your wonderful programs.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited. So I have the chat box open on the side of my computer. So feel free certainly to interject. No problem at all to unmute yourself and pop in with a question. I know it can always be super awkward and there's a slight lag, but just do it. Or I'll keep the chat box open as well, and feel free, if it's easier, I'm going to be monitoring that as we go through. Since Tracy is kindly driving the presentation, leaves me a little bit free actually to keep an eye on the chat box. So feel free to ask questions or make comments there as well. So as I begin to get started, it would be great if you personally, or if you happen to know that your town or city has worked with a Corps in the past, feel free to put a little message in the chat box, as that'll help me see where some of your familiarity might be. By way of introduction, as Tracy mentioned, my name is Scott Segerstrom. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Youth Corps Association, based here in downtown Denver, with a statewide purview. And so Tracy, with that, we'll get started. And so on my screen, which is not a big deal, but just in case I look down at my notes, some of the bottom text is cut off in the screen share. But I will, so just forgive me if I'm looking down. I have the PowerPoint printed off, and that may just be my screen that's showing that. So CYCA, we're a statewide coalition of conservation service corps that operate around the state, and our young people work on land, water, and energy. We're a pretty sizable force for stewardship in Colorado. So in 2019, we had just under 2,000 young people deployed doing these projects across the state. I think the one thing in particular I would highlight is that bullet point at the bottom that hopefully is showing up for you, which basically says that members may begin service as young as middle school, and ages will run through returning military veterans that are in their mid to late 30s. So while Youth Corps is in our name, it's becoming more and more of a misnomer, where actually I would say the majority of our participants are between the ages of 16 to 25, and even more specifically within that subset, it's probably the largest common age is between 18 to 21 years old. So as corps have advanced and become a little more sophisticated, we're sort of moving a little bit away from a pure youth corps model into more of a conservation corps model. So you can move forward, Tracy. So this may be one of the most important slides for your organization, which is you'll see where the 8 different corps are operated. Each of these 8 conservation corps are independent organizations, but they have CYCA, myself and my small staff, to work on their behalf. So one important thing to understand is I'm like a trade association. I think a lot of people make the very natural assumption that we're the mothership And these are our 8 chapters around the state, but it's exactly the opposite. These are 8 cores that tell me what to do. And so hopefully you'll see here which core is operating where your municipality and township is located, so you can get an idea of where those partners might be. I will add that in the northeastern part of the state, we don't have a core that regularly executes project in that area. So you can see Washington, Yuma, Kit Carson, you name it. They look like they don't have a core assigned to them. That's not the case. It's that those cores don't regularly execute projects there. There's just not enough public land to sustain full-time core operations out there. But we do have cores that will come do work in those areas. So if your municipality is in Sedgwick, we can pop back to the map.
Yeah. There we go.
So if your municipality is in Sedgwick or Phillips or Yuma or you name it, either Weld County or Mile High Youth Corps will absolutely be thrilled to come do work in your community. And we can move forward, Tracy. So a quick snapshot as to who our core members may be. So about 29% of our members belong to an ethnic minority. About 40% come from low-income backgrounds. And one of the statistics that I think I undervalued about the core world, both when I was a participant and for my first few years here, both working at a core and then coming to CYCA, is that about 1 in 4 members are getting their first job with conservation corps. We have an intentional mission to get youth and young adults out of that chicken and egg scenario where they can't get a job because they don't have experience, and they can't get experience because no one's giving them their first job. It is mission driven for us to find people without an employment history and provide that experience to them. So one of the really important things that you do when you engage a conservation corps is you're providing the venue for Coloradans' first professional experience, a really big first step in their career. They're getting evaluated for the first time. They are undergoing professional expectations, experiencing a professional workplace. All of these really critical breakthrough experiences that are going to serve them well above and beyond their time on your project. So I would just call attention to that's one of the really meaningful ways that when you partner with corps, and it's really great to see Granby, Lyons, Ridgeway, a few people chiming in about their experience with corps. I can assure you, you have done magic for some of those participants. And we hope to grow that impact today with sort of educating you on what corps can do. So Tracy, we can move ahead. So there are 2 ways, generally speaking, that people engage with conservation corps through CYCA. The first is internships with the Bureau of Land Management. Really great program. Not going to take any of your time on that today. What we really care about is our crew-based conservation projects, where what do corps do? How do they do them? What are the benefits to those things? That's what we want to cover today, because that's what's going to be relevant to how we might be able to serve your community and hopefully help you improve the lives and the vitality of where you're serving. So we're going to sandwich my presentation with this really great news to get you to do some pre-thinking. We have, so Madison Brannigan, who's joined us from Great Outdoors, Colorado. She is our program officer there. So the happy news I'm bringing you today is I am bringing money to you. I have $1 million that I have to award this fall, and someone's going to get it, so it might as well be you. I want to give you a really brief overview of this funding opportunity now, just to get you thinking. So as I start to talk about what corps do, how we work, you're able to do some pre-thinking and understand not only how might this tie in to Main Street dollars, but also how might you become an applicant to this opportunity. I think also Tracy has sent the RFP around, so you've seen a little bit of a sneak preview. But this is a really tailor-made funding opportunity for you if you can come up with the right project that meets the criteria. So really quick overview, and then we're going to return to this slide to answer any questions you might have. So $1 million pot of funds. That's a lot of money. Sounds like a lot of money, and when it comes to the core world, it is a lot of money. So we're really excited, and this used to be a $500,000 pot of funding. So we're going to double the amount of award recipients that are coming this way. We're going to open this Friday. It requires a 10% match, 100% of which can be in kind, but cash is always king. And if this is an area that your Main Street dollars can come as an investment, I think it's only going to help with whatever application you're developing. Very straightforward application process, 3-page limit, no trap questions or anything like that, pretty much straight to the point. And I think potentially for some of the smaller municipalities, even more exciting is there's no financial management necessary. You come up with a project, you apply. If you're awarded, Great Outdoors Colorado and CYCA take care of all the finances. They pay me, I pay the Corps. What you receive is free work, executing your project with basically pretty minimal administration needed. So don't let a lack of FTE or dedicated staff capacity keep you from applying to this, because really what we need from you is help executing the project, overseeing it, making sure the Corps is lined out well. But when it comes to the grant management, it's pretty minimal. So Tracy, we can move forward. So let's talk about what do Corps actually do? And again, feel free to interject with any questions you might have. So I think of particular note for you as Main Street members, you're right in our wheelhouse, projects we do throughout the year on a small and large scale, trail construction and maintenance, probably the biggest piece of the pie for what Corps do. That's probably our most common project. A very close second is invasive species removal. And I want to pause on this for a second, just because oftentimes there's a little bit of concern on what does that actually mean. So 4 of our large Corps have commercial applicators license from the State Department of Agriculture. On top of that, they have licensed certified operators, that's a proper noun, that permits them to legally execute herbicide and pesticide applicators onto your land, as well as handle the sensitive chemicals. So we essentially can do these projects from cradle to grave. So if you have Russian olive, or you have tamarisk, or you have some filthy thistles or something that is a non-native harmful species that maybe is restricting water flow in your municipality, maybe it is restricting recreation access, could be a number of different ways. It could be choking out native habitat. There's a particular, maybe bird watching is integral to your community, but this non-native species is reducing that ecosystem and not bringing tourism dollars to your area. Corps have the ability to go in with chainsaws, with chemicals, and remove those, chip the material, and remove them. So it's a really comprehensive service delivery that we offer. Tree planting, urban gardens, other mainstream tasks that we can do for you. A few of the things that might be relevant that are also very common mission scopes for us is fire mitigation and suppression. We do lots of forest thinning, lots of tree falling. Our members are fully certified as S212 operators. In our world, that is essentially you are a fully licensed and trained chainsaw operator that can fall trees. So we do this extensively. So if within your municipality boundary, you need forest thinning to protect your infrastructure from wildland fire or just general forestry management, we have the ability to do that. Do mining operations, land reclamation, we do historic preservation of structures, and just for your awareness, some of our Corps also do green energy installation, particularly in low-income housing, to lower their energy bills and create economic independence. We do more than what's on here, so please feel free to ask questions. And I did see one question, on historic preservation, Gail. Thank you so much for asking that. We have a couple of corps in particular, that's Rocky Mountain Youth Corps and Southwest Conservation Corps. So that is a massive, the majority of the Western Slope. And Mile High Youth Corps can do some as well. They have the ability to do some historic preservation. Oftentimes we partner with HistoriCorps. So some of you are probably well aware of HistoriCorps. If not, they are Colorado's leading entity for helping to restore historic buildings, historic homesteads. They provide expert knowledge. They can provide funding. They're a really great partner. Though we also work with local historic districts, local historic nonprofits. So corps will do things like they'll restore old homesteads, put on a new roof, help shore up a structure, carpentry work. They will help restore historic fence line, buck and rail, things like that, original technique. In essence, know that corps often have that ability. And the best bet, Gail, and for anyone else interested, is to contact that corps and get those specific conversations started. Projects for GOCO may have a historic preservation component to them. Madison, do you want to, I'll quickly hand that off to you briefly, and then Larry, we're gonna get to your question next. Madison, but can you talk a little bit about where you might see the nexus of historic preservation and the GOCO funding opportunity, if one exists?
Sure, I would say, if there is a relation to that historic preservation and recreation, that could be a perfect fit for that. Just because of the way GOCO is funded and what we fund in particular, we do want to tie in that project outcome to either outdoor stewardship or outdoor recreation. So if there's that tie also to historic preservation with the outdoor recreation or the conservation, that could certainly be eligible.
So Madison, to give you an example that to make sure that I'm clear as well. So let's say one of these municipalities had an interpretive trail, and along that interpretive trail there was an old cabin, an old barn, a historic stone fence line from the frontier era. They could tie potentially. Is it true, Madison, that they could have that historic preservation activity be part of improving a recreation infrastructure?
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example.
Great. So Gail, hopefully that starts to answer some of your questions, but please don't be shy about following up as I move along with more specifics. More than happy to make sure that you are well supported. Larry, I will say that the vast majority of our green energy projects are in the Denver and Fort Collins area, and to a lesser extent within that access. That is where we have the funding to do that work right now, because as some of you know all too well, often that's where a lot of funding is concentrated, right? So that's where Energy Outreach Colorado and some other organizations that have a urban density mission have the funding to let us do what we do. So in brief, corps have the ability to do things like install thermostats, install high efficiency toilets, aerators on faucets and shower heads, CFL light bulb installation. Lots of corps do that work. And so, they'll come in, they do all that work, they work with the homeowners. It does not have to be public housing, it can be private housing. And so that's a really common mission. Same thing, Larry, probably best to reach out to your local corps now that you have sort of this seed of knowledge to see, what's their capacity to do that work and what their specific competency is. But hopefully that's a little bit of a bite at the apple in terms of what our mission scopes are. Gail, I'm going to return back to your really good question. Working on both public and private buildings for historic preservation. To the best of my knowledge, they can absolutely do historic preservation on private buildings. And Madison, I don't think that would have any impact on a GOCO application, whether the building itself was public or private.
That's a great question. I don't know if we've actually come across that, so I would have to check in. Typically, our projects do have to be open to the public, but with the CYCA RFP, we do have opportunities for private conservation on conserved properties. So that is something I would have to check in on, and I can certainly get back to you.
Yeah, that is a really smart, insightful question, Gail. One thing I know is the vast majority of our members are enrolled in AmeriCorps. Not all of them, but the vast majority is. And it is a rule, it is a federal law, it is a serious federal law, that AmeriCorps members can only work on projects that have a public benefit. So you can't have AmeriCorps members, and Gail, I know this is not a totally germane to your question, but just by way of example, you can't have AmeriCorps members do fire mitigation on private property. So like a private HOA couldn't say, hey, we'd love to support community service while also raising the value of my home. So come do fire mitigation on my property. Yes, there's a public benefit to it, but you can't benefit a singular private landowner that way. So similarly, Gail, this very well might not be your example, but let's say that there was a historic mansion or a historic barn that was privately owned with no public access. For the sake of culture, yes, we would love to see that conserved, but AmeriCorps members can't do that work because there's not public access and there's not a direct, demarcation line of public benefit to that. So I know they can work on public buildings. Private buildings would be a more nuanced conversation with your local Corps. So hopefully, Main Street members, this has given you a little bit of a sense on what we do. Again, we do a little bit more than that, but I hope I'm going to run through a few case studies to put a little more meat on the bone to hopefully catalyze some specific project ideas or some questions about could Corps do X or Y. So Tracy, with that, we'll start to run through the case studies. So our first one is actually a GOCO funded project from that happened last year. So City of Pagosa Springs had a single track bicycle trail that needed work. Again, hopefully this isn't the case for you all, but this picture is cut off just a little bit on my screen. That's a before and after shot. I think you can still generally get the vibe of what's happening there to get you an idea of what Corps did for City of Pagosa to improve this really important bicycle infrastructure that was within their city limits. Tracy, we can go to the next slide here. Again, more before and after in terms of improving a French drain there, making it a much smoother, much more welcoming bicycle experience, and just give you an idea of some of the urban trail work and some of the competencies that we have. I will tell you, Corps really have very high competency when it comes to trail projects. So even if your project is going to include a wooden bridge building, switchbacks, elevated tread above boggy areas, ADA accessible 4 feet wide gravel trail, we can do it. I would say we really only start to hit our limit on competency in trail building when it comes to heavy equipment, laying concrete. So if you were looking for a CDOT level, 6 foot wide asphalt, new asphalt laid trail, we would probably need to talk about bringing in partnerships to do some of the heavy work. But pretty much everything, from a pretty complex ADA accessible trail down, we have the ability to do that and have those competencies. I see we have a really good question that I'm going to pause to answer from Gail in terms of what is involved with working with the various landowners. So there are a few ways to tackle that, Gail, and forgive me if I don't get this bullseye. Feel free to follow up. Corps work with all landowners, and some we have pre-existing agreements with, and certainly relationships. So if you envision your project also engaging the federal landowners that may impact your township, Corps likely are really good white pages to get you to the right federal partner to get in contact with. Because chances are we've worked with that U.S. Forest Service district, or we've worked with that BLM field office. When it comes to non-federal, I'm less confident they're going to have those relationships, but they certainly might have them. So they know, state parks are a bad example because they're not eligible for this GOCO RFP or wildlife areas. But if there is some conserved land that's non-federal, I'm less certain. I know that we'll have that relationship, but when it comes to the federal government, oftentimes we can make that connection for you because Corps do millions and millions of dollars of federal work a year. Gail, don't hold me to this and Main Street members, but I'm going to estimate that every year Corps collectively do on the level of maybe $10 to $15 million of federal work a year. We're probably the recipient of certainly $10 million annually in federal allocations to do fire mitigation, invasive species, trail construction, things like that. We would love to see federal and other landowners become part of your GOCO application when it's relevant and a good fit. Tracy, we can keep moving forward. So our second case study is invasive species removal. Similarly, this is a GOCO funded project from 2019. Canyon City has this very pervasive Russian olive and tamarisk issue. Corps were able to come in and clear 9 acres of these. I think that before and after picture below is probably some of the best that we have, where you can see this river access, this bench and lunch spot and recreation amenity was really being crowded out by invasive species. What you can see is that the views, the access, generally just not a very healthy ecosystem visually here. What you may not see, but what is also happening, is those really filthy, awful invasive species are drinking a lot of water that don't belong to them. Right on the shoreline there, they're reducing river flow, they're reducing habitat, they're creating downstream contamination. So your municipal friends downstream are getting hammered because of these filthy things. So Corps have the ability to come in with chainsaws to fall those invasives and then immediately apply herbicide and pesticides to the stumps. Fun fact, you have to get the herbicide and pesticide on there. I believe it's within 30 seconds of the tree falling until the cambium closes and the stump closes off, and you're guaranteed regrowth. So you'll see a Corps member drop that tree. Another member who was at a very safe 2-tree distance away will come hopping in and will spray that herbicide and pesticide so that those chemicals get absorbed. Otherwise, that stump closes off, and in 5 years, you're going to see the same scene repeated. Tracy, we can move forward. And so same project, you see us working on some Russian olive and some tamarisk here, away from the riparian areas, chipping them, and basically really helping Canyon City Metro accomplish their local plan for invasive species treatment. Tracy, we can move forward. And our last case study, tree planting. We have the ability to do tree planting on a small or large scale. Here you see a large scale. This project was executed with the Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. This is reclaiming the London Mine, a long closed excavation and extraction facility. We came in and planted almost 1,500 trees and shrubs covering 800 square feet, and also planted an acre worth of seeds. So, a little bit, some of these are going to be apples to oranges for maybe on a small scale at your municipality, but we kind of wanted to show you the large scale that we're able to operate at. So we certainly will have the capacity and the ability to come in and support you. I'm going to pause for one moment here because we have another excellent question from Gail. So given the equipment in the Cañon City photographs, do you have our own equipment or do we work to borrow them? Gail, that's another excellent question. You are helping me out immensely. Some corps have their own equipment. So in the Cañon City picture, Mile High Youth Corps, which if you remember from the map, basically does the entire Front Range below, from Boulder County below, all the way to the New Mexican border and all the way to the Kansan border. They have their own chipper. So in those circumstances, they have the ability to deploy those on a project. Whereas many of our other corps, if not all, I don't think another corps owns a chipper. Rocky Mountain Youth Corps used to have one, don't think they do now. So oftentimes that is part of the pre-project conversation is you see you have your Main Street dollars. And let's say you're going to bring GOCO money to the table, right? You have applied to, you want to apply to do a 2-acre invasive species removal project on 2,500 feet of a riparian area. So you will contact your corps and you'll say, hey, I'm interested in this GOCO proposal. Can we have a conversation? I need help writing this proposal. So it's in those initial discussions where the corps will say, great, tell me the circumstances of the project. And so you'll say it's 2,500 linear feet along a riparian area, removing invasive species and spraying herbicide. And the corps will say, great, to accomplish that, that's a 2-week project. So that's what you need to apply for. And Gail, you'll say, awesome. So I know I need 2 weeks of work. And the corps will say, what do you want done with the woody material when we're done? And if you say, we would love it chipped, then that conversation will figure out, okay, do we have a chipper and who has one? Do you want it hauled away? Well, do we need a pickup truck? Do you want it chipped right into the bed of a truck? Does your city have those resources, or is that an additional cost because it needs to be leased? And so all of that gets worked out in those really critical pre-project discussions. Excellent, Tracy, we can keep moving forward. So I've answered some of these really good questions as we work through here, but given generally what you know about the parameters of the GOCO RFP and a little bit of the how this RFP works, I'm going to pause just for a moment if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions that's come up for them.
Scott, I'll also chime in here and say that I'm going to drop my contact information in the chat. So if questions come up after this, if you think of a question tomorrow, definitely please feel free to reach out to me.
And what I'll say is some best practices in terms of engaging with this RFP. The first is earlier discussions are always better. Corps are really excited to hear from you. As you can imagine, the COVID-19 has of course been really has been a really interesting curveball for us. I will tell you, and I'm happy to answer more questions one-on-one or offline, but I will tell you corps are fully operational right now. Again, I'm happy to go into details and risk management strategies and all that, but just know that corps are out there right now at a reduced capacity, but we are executing projects this year. So we fully expect to do projects next year, even if, God forbid, we're still facing a similar impact from COVID-19. We fully intend to be doing projects when it is permissible and allowable and reasonable to do so. So, given the COVID-19 has stretched corps a little more thin than we've been in the past, reaching out sooner rather than later when the RFP opens on Friday is absolutely a best practice. It's going to give you time to have pre-project discussions, answer weird curveballs that will come up with your project, things you didn't think of in your first discussion, but when you go to write the proposal, you realize you'd probably like to include. It'll help you begin to learn about how the core model works. So that's one piece. The second piece, similarly, is to apply early. I can't tell you how many heartbreaking stories we get every year from people that are crashing the deadline and either face a technical issue, which we try our best to work around to get you in by the deadline, or more heartbreaking is when there is a section of the RFP that they didn't read, or it's an incomplete application. So it still rarely happens. Full transparency, we get 80% of our proposals within 48 hours of the September deadline. I totally get it. I do the same thing. But if you can possibly get in ahead of that deadline, you will have a safer, smoother route to making sure everything's in good shape and our reviewers are fully supported. And then thirdly, it's going to be a competitive RFP. So I think thematically, the things that work the best is projects typically have they must be a minimum of 2 weeks. We rarely fund projects that go beyond 6 weeks of work. We can do so. If it is a really compelling project and you can make your case, then, and your discussions with the cores have been positive, then I don't see a reason why not to go big. But just know that generally speaking, 95% of the awarded projects are in that 2 to 6 week window. And Madison, probably the most common being 3 to 4 weeks, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
But just to clarify, Scott, I'm just from our conversations, this is for if you wanted to apply for the GOCO funding. The Youth Corps themselves do smaller projects, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, that is a fantastic clarification, Tracy. So generally speaking, the smallest project that cores will do is often 1 week of work. It's what fits with their project schedule the best. But please don't hesitate if you do have a smaller project. That should not dissuade you from reaching out to cores, because oftentimes maybe they can cobble together another smaller project in the area or do some shifting in their schedules. Just know that often the default conversation starts with what a 1 week project would look like and goes from there. But please, if you have a one day, a 3 day, a 4 day, we're interested in all of your projects and to have those conversations. But to Tracy's very good point, an application to the GOCO RFP requires a 2 week minimum.
Well, I know we have people, very creative people on the phone with projects I know can somewhat, could very potentially align with this. I know there's been discussions about campgrounds. There's been expansion of outdoor spaces for our communities in the downtowns. Does anyone have specific questions to the projects that they're looking at within their work plans that they might want to have clarified?
This is Becky. I have a question for sure, and I apologize. I was kind of going on and off. I know that we've looked at similar projects with like the NCCC, and unfortunately weren't able to host them as planned just because the logistical issues of housing them ended up being a situation. Is this a similar situation? I think that the scale of these projects for 2 to 3 weeks ends up making it definitely a lot easier to find those housing options for them while they're here. How is that usually handled with the court?
It's a great question, Becky. So we don't require urban housing. So there are one of two ways in which cores work. One is on a day crew model. So if your municipality is located close enough to the Corps' base of operations, then they will just send a crew out in the morning and they'll do the service during the day and then return back to base at night. And there's no housing consideration whatsoever. Or if the project, for whatever reason, whether it's distance or some of our cores work only exclusively on a 24/7 model, those cores will camp out. So they will work with you to find public land that either you provide, or they'll find a partner and they'll set up a base camp, and where they'll cook their own food, they do their own meals, and they will get in the van in the morning at base camp and drive to your project location. We do not require any municipal housing for any of our projects.
And I believe you carry your own insurance as well. Is that correct?
We do. Yep. We have all our own liability insurance. We can easily get a insurance certificate naming you, your municipality. I do this 100 times a year, where a partner will say, "Hey, I need an insurance certificate," and we call our insurers and get one in your name, because we carry all that. I want to say it's $1 million liability policy. Often that's the minimum for federal projects and state projects. Yes, we are fully compliant and well experienced in that realm. We have our own workers' comp insurance. Exactly right.
And Deidre, I think, yep, you unmuted yourself.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, I'm in Ridgeway, and I have a question about a project that we've got, which is kind of an expansion of a park area that's not like a wooded park. It's a sort of an in-town entry to the town park. And what our plan requires is a lot of irrigation and landscaping. And so I'm wondering if that's something that the Corps has done before, if you guys have that sort of training or not.
Yeah, so your Corps is going to be Southwest Conservation Corps, coming out of Durango. And I can't definitively say that they can execute that project, but it certainly sounds like something that they would have the competency to do. I'll put it this way: it's definitely worth the phone call and the conversation to them, particularly the landscaping component. Again, I'm not speaking for them, so don't hold me to this. Irrigation, whether it's installing an irrigation system and things like that, I bet you they know half of it, like digging the trenches and getting some of the fundamental work done. I have no clue if they've ever had experience laying that pipe, working with the water, the plumbing, all of that. But it's certainly worth a call to them to see.
Okay, that's great. Do you know who I contact there?
Boy, normally it would be Kevin Heiner, but he's on leave. Forgive me for one moment as I bring up my email, because Kevin just emailed me yesterday.
You can put it in chat for me, Scott. That's fine. I don't want to interrupt everybody.
All right, I'll try and dig that up for you, because he sent me some contacts to use in the interim.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
And then would Ridgeway, I guess another question follow up there is, would Ridgeway be, I mean, we're 2 hours from Durango, would that be considered a day situation, or they would need to stay somewhere?
I'm betting they would, yeah, I'm betting they would work to get set up at the state park or something like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Absolutely. I know Gail had a question. I don't want to get lost in the chat box briefly, and Larry as well. So let's, if we can pause just for a moment, Madison, let's kick it to you. I'm going to trust your memory better than mine if you recall any of the more streetscape projects that go.
So I know one great example, and I believe we funded them twice, and it's slipping my mind, but I'm pretty sure it was the town of Brookside. They had stewardship issues in one of their downtown parks, and we funded a project for a crew to come out to do like painting the restrooms and picnic benches and helping with realigning a trail in that downtown park. So there's certainly opportunities in that in the Youth Corps RFP to do things like the streetscaping in a downtown pocket park. Even if it relates to COVID this year, I think that's fair to talk about as well. Maybe, you need a new trail to have folks socially distant in the park. Things along those lines is totally eligible for the Youth Corps RFP. And if it doesn't fit perfectly in the Youth Corps RFP, I'm happy to have a discussion about our other grant programs as well. And, we partner with CYCA not only on this RFP, but on our other grant programs as well. But we have certainly funded projects in the past that relate to those kind of parks and streetscape projects.
Yep, and one distinction I would make, I would add real quick, Madison, is this is a great place to also just mention the distinction between, let's say, your Main Street funding or other funding sources and GOCO. In the example Madison gave, that project was fully compliant because not only did it involve painting, there was also conservation activities involved, right? As Madison mentioned, a little bit of trail realignment, those sorts of outcomes. So just be mindful on the GOCO RFP, there still needs to be some sort of conservation or stewardship outcome. Painting over, painting and things like that can be included if they are matched with some also sort of recreation infrastructure, recreation outcome. For the Main Street funding and other funding options, you may be able to pull together let's say a painting only or a beautification only project, and the Corps can do that. That's the distinction. The GOCO project brings with it that lens of, okay, what's the conservation component here? So I want to add that just so we didn't disappoint you by seeing a bunch of beautification, streetscaping only, and you're like, oh, what the heck? Like I thought this was a magic bullet. Like, no, we've got to have that stewardship, outdoor rec, outdoor conservation component to it.
That's a great point. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, but with Main Street things, you might have some flexibility.
Exactly. Yeah, you're all pretty familiar with what Main Street will fund, so that's great. But yeah, with the Conservation Corps or in GOCO involved, maybe you're getting your labor for free on one of those park projects. If you succeed at that grant, or maybe we're paying Deidre for the actual irrigation lines. And so there could be some leveraging that way. And then Madison, before most of you hopped on the line, it sounded like at least with another funding opportunity with GOCO, there's that there might be that lens of expanding your streetscapes to businesses with their a different funding opportunity that I'm going to include in an email to you all on Monday. And I don't know if some of those same opportunities are available with the Youth Corps RFP, or if there's some distinctions there. But could you talk a little bit about how that might work?
Yeah, so the Resilient Communities RFP, do you want me to go over that?
Please.
Yeah, so as most of you know, GOCO is funded by the lottery, and we distribute this funding through competitive grant programs. Obviously, CYCA is a great example. So because of COVID this past year, we have redirected $15 million to a new program called a Resilient Communities Program. And this program has begun already and will continue until March of 2021. Again, this is in direct response to the pandemic, so it is obviously a new program for us. And what we're really prioritizing through this program is projects that will either build organization and community resiliency, also investing in operations and capacities tied to specific project outcomes, and investing in stewardship opportunities that address increased use as a result from COVID. So we've really seen kind of a range of different projects that have come through this first round. We've seen things from stewardship of trails because of, again, that increased use, all the way to, I was telling Tracy that one community is coming in to hire a consultant to do a really quick turnaround of a kind of a mini plan in order to help close down some streets in the downtown area so that they can set up some pocket parks and do social distancing in their downtown area. That being said, because we are Great Outdoors Colorado, these projects should relate to outdoor recreation in some way, or stewardship of public lands. So those are really the two stipulations on the Resilient Communities RFP. We've seen communities coming in for land acquisitions, because again, there's that increase of use and they need more space for folks to socially distance. We've seen folks coming in for staff time because they had to furlough employees, and now there's not enough park rangers, for example, to be out on the trails and in the park. And we're seeing a huge increase in usage of trails and parks. And sometimes these are folks who might have never been outside before, so they don't know the outdoor ethics code. So communities need funding in order to hire or keep on their employees to steward that park or be a park ranger there, things along those lines. So it's pretty broad, and I'm happy to chat if people have ideas for the communities program. We don't really have we didn't dictate how much you can come in for, and we're not dictating timelines and things like that. We also decreased the match requirements because we understand that a lot of communities had to decrease their budget. So we are requiring 10% match on that program, and it only has to be in kind. So it could be in cash, but we're not requiring cash this year. So again, I put my information in the chat function. If you have a project in mind for the Resilient Communities program, I'm definitely happy to chat about that.
Excellent. Tracy, I want to hit just the last two slides really quickly because they're not, there's just a couple of things I don't want to bypass here in our last 2 minutes really quickly. Main takeaways. When you hire a Corps, you do really great things. It is not just an investment, and we work really hard to distinguish ourselves from contractors. The data you see on here that we don't have time to dive into too deep, that's fine, but the data on here is these are evidence-based results from external evaluations we've had conducted by North Carolina State, Texas A&M, BYU. So these are professional evaluations have found that Corps are an evidence-based program to make real impacts. We see our members have healthier lifestyles, become economically more independent, get introduced to the outdoors, are more engaged in community issues. A lot of magic happens when you bring a Corps and support us and partner together. And face the last slide, please. And so the outcomes from when you hire a Corps, when you engage with us, first thing you do that a lot of partners don't immediately realize, first thing you do is send people to college. I know that sounds crazy. Like you need trees planted in your city. When you have us plant your trees, you're sending someone to college because you are giving them their necessary AmeriCorps service hours that lets them get their education award. When you hire a Corps and have members helping build trail, you're giving them economic independence. You're not only paying them, which you are, and you're not only giving them a job, which you are, you're also giving them AmeriCorps hours to get their education award, which they can use to reduce their student loan debt. If you serve in AmeriCorps for a whole year, you get a $6,000 voucher to reduce your student loans. So you're also launching these young people, getting them out from underneath student loan debt, which many of us have experienced firsthand. And thirdly, you're giving them really critical workforce experience. So when you have a Corps come out and do forestry, they typically have been certified as a wildland firefighter, certified as a chainsaw operator. When you have them do invasive species, they get certified with herbicide and pesticide. They're getting their first job. So these are really important outcomes I just didn't want to neglect to get to. There's a whole nother human dimension component when you work with Corps. And there's 1 minute to go. I got it in. I did not go over.
I was going to say, and yet I tried to make you do so. I just want to thank again Scott and Madison for joining us today. I really think that there can be some really great matches between CORE and our main streets. I would love to see some things happen here. I know that they have in the past. Christy down in Lake City, who was not able to join us today, mentioned how Lake City actually had a CORE for 12 years and working with them, and they accomplished great things there. So be creative, think about it, reach out to me. I can always put you in touch with Scott. I believe Madison put her contact information in chat. Reach out to your COREs. They sound, all of my interactions with Scott have been just fabulous. They're very customer service oriented. They believe in their mission like Main Street believes in ours. And so I really do think that when we can align, it would be a great thing. So I do want to let everybody off. I'm sure I just ran over our 12 o'clock, but once again, thanks to everyone for joining us today. And we did record this, so we'll get this up online.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.